I'm a member of Indivisible Bellingham, and I want to thank all of you, especially our special guests, for joining us this evening. Just a personal note about this evening. Kevin Leha was supposed to do the evening's facilitating, but a personal schedule conflict took place, so I'm filling in for Kevin. The odd thing about that is that I've been the least involved of the 8 Indivisible core group members in the planning of tonight's event. I've been working on some other local issues. I am truly a last minute fill-in. So if I make any errors, I'm going to ask other astute core members to jump diplomatically in and correct me. I'm also going to offer any before the fact apologies to our wonderful legislative representatives. Our guests this evening are for Representative Deborah Lekanoff. Kaylee Galloway, you'll be speaking for about 15 minutes. Thank you, Kaylee. Representative Alex Rammel. Thank you, Alex. Representative Alicia Rule. And thank you, Alicia. And for Representative Sharon Shoemake, I don't know if Sarah will be speaking or not. Does anyone know that? Well, we'll see what happens as we progress. And each person will have about 15 minutes to speak. To begin with, we at Indivisible Bellingham like to acknowledge this beautiful land on which we live, in which our collective ancestors claimed as their own, is indeed the traditional territory of the Lummi and Nooksack peoples. Their presence is imbued in every aspect of the natural land. We want to recognize and nurture our relationship with our Coast Salish neighbors and the shared responsibilities to their homelands where we all reside today. The mission of Indivisible Bellingham is united by principles of fairness, inclusion, tolerance, and a just society for all through nonviolent civic engagement, political involvement, and consistent pressure on our elected officials, including our wonderful elected officials here this evening. So at a normal meeting, we'd be taking questions for our guests and peppering them for a couple of hours. But as not much about life seems to be normal anymore, we're going to do some things a bit differently. Our reps have been working long hours holding floor votes, and as I understand it, some days going late into the night, which is why we're especially grateful that you're here. For that reason, we know that each of them have bills that are near and dear to them and to us, and we'd like to offer them the opportunity to explain in greater detail their priorities, why these bills are important to them, and what we can do to help. If you do have a question for any of the representatives, we will try to get to them if there is time, but our plan is for this to only be an hour-long meeting. Questions can be put in the chat strip that will appear on your screen if you click chat at the bottom of your screen. And please select everyone from the chat drop-down menu. And if your question is for a particular representative, please name them. So representatives, you're coming up on a deadline week, a week from tomorrow, which will be the last day to consider bills that originated in the House. We'd like to hear from each of you about what's most important to you and what we can do to help you. We'll try to keep everyone to no more than 15 minutes. So that'll be my job. I'll try and be tactful. And we're going to start with Kaylee Galloway for Representative Lekanoff. Okay, so Kaylee, are you ready?
Michael, I was wondering if we could defer first to our representatives. I see Rep Rammel suggested Rep Rule start with us. So if you're okay with me mixing up the order, I would like to suggest that.
I was doing such a great job until you upended. Yes, Representative Rammel.
Oh, I thought Rule.
Oh, Rule?
Yeah, I was gonna. Yeah, Alicia's got young kids, and their bedtime is probably earlier than my kids' bedtime.
Okay, Representative Rule, you're on my other screen. That's why I just did that. So you are first, Representative Rule.
Thank you all so much. And thank you to my colleagues for allowing me to go first so that I can see my kids for just a few minutes before bed. I really appreciate your patience with that. And I'm really happy to see you all here. It is so nice to see your faces. So thank you for taking the time. I will try to tell you briefly about what we've been working on, but it is a lot. It is so exciting. It's moving fast and we're getting a lot done. So I hope you're as excited as I am about all the things that are happening. Personally, I'm working on a few priorities, so thank you for asking about those priorities. My homeless children bill just went through the House side and passed through, and I'm so excited about that. I want to tell you a little bit about it. We'll see what happens in the Senate side of things, but it's for children who are the ages 0 to 5. And for some reason, over time, children that were 0 to 5 were actually not included in the homeless definition, even though kids who are over 5 were, when they met certain criteria. And one of those criteria is really important to us here because we know the face of homeless children looks a little bit different in the rural areas sometimes. So this is an inclusive definition, and it includes places like a camper that's parked on the side of the road. That, yes, that is homeless for a child. And really we're talking about babies. I would call 0 to 5 babies. In my house, they're babies. Or the other thing that we look at is children who are moving from couch to couch, or maybe fashioning a bed out of blankets on someone's floor, and then only to be kind of at the mercy of whoever's allowing them to stay for a while and moving from home to home. That's also homeless because it's not stability, and that's really hard on children. So this bill then would allow them to qualify for the same services that children over the age of 5 qualify for. And specifically what we'll be looking at is the ECAP program, which is such a fun thing to talk about, because if you talk to any of the parents who have benefited from this ECAP program, they are passionate about it because it does the very thing that we're trying to do so much here, which is creating opportunity. It provides services, including educational services for the child, but they're so great about including the family as well. And really it's wraparound services for the family for those most vulnerable children. So I'm really excited about that one. I know we're gonna be looking at a lot of good legislation around trying to tackle this homeless issue. But the other thing we're working really hard on, I'm working really hard on, is the mental health issue. And there is so much opportunity to do good work in substance use disorder and mental health treatment that we will not tackle and finish it this session, but I am working so hard to do my part to advocate for more services in that area. We have a huge gap. It's been a legacy problem that we arrived at this point here with a long history of being underfunded in this area. And I think we're now just beginning to see the crisis level that we have known for a long time that's hit around this. So I'm gonna be working on every front to ensure that we are meeting those needs. One specific piece that I am working on trying to find some funding for is getting mental health support in schools for our children. And that can look like partially professionals that are trauma-informed professionals, due to knowing that we've all been through community trauma, including our children who've been out of school for nearly a year. And as we try to get children back in school, we know that they're going to need to be getting their needs met in addition to just the academic needs that are great. Those are really important, but we also know that kids don't learn when they're traumatized. So some kids have probably done pretty well, and maybe the trauma has been minimal, although there's grief and loss. And some of our kids, just a moment, please, speaking of which, some of our kids will have been hit even harder. So those are our most vulnerable kids, again. And once they have those early traumatic experiences, extra trauma, hi, I'll be right out. They're home. Extra trauma then compounds on top of that. So those can be lifelong implications. So I'm looking for several ways that we might be able to get some services in place. And one of them is the professionals. The other one is looking at putting in curriculum and socio-emotional learning for children. This is great that my kids are coming in, because you can see that I'm passionate about kids. But one of the other things I wanted to tell you about that I'm really excited about is I'm I'm doing a request for some money to fund outdoor education programs. And ultimately, long-term goal, I would love to see every child have access to the outdoors. That's all of our kids. And there are lots of ways to attack that. So I'm going to be working on it on multiple levels. But right now, the thing I'm looking at is how can we increase outdoor education in our schools right here in Whatcom County, particularly on the cusp of the tail end of COVID, because we know that kids can be outside, and we know that we're up against how do we put kids back in school because they don't have enough space. So that is something that's in progress, but not finished, and hoping to be able to make some headway on getting kids out more often. There is multiple layers of this that I'm getting really excited about that in the long term we can do. No Child Left Inside is a start. So that's a competitive grant program, getting kids outside. But this is important for all children. It's important for mental health. It's important for alternative learners, kids who don't necessarily qualify for like a learning disability that might be addressed in an IEP or an individual education program for them. That's a different thing, but there's a lot of these kids who don't necessarily qualify for that, but they do qualify for something called the 504. Those kids do really well doing alternative learning, working with their hands, getting outside. So I just think that there's a lot of opportunity that we can build on in that area. And I think there's a lot of potential over the next years that we could really build out that program. Before I go, what questions do you have? Probably you have some burning questions, and then I'm going to go say hi to my kids.
Representative Rule, you do have a few minutes left, and I know you're going to leave, but one question that we're posing to each rep is, what would you like help from us on? I know that you spoke what's near and dear to you, but are there specific things that you would like support and assistance for?
Thank you for asking. That is such a nice thing to hear in what is kind of the messy middle. This is a tough time in the legislature. We're doing a lot of negotiating. We are fighting for what's important to us, and sometimes that's a little bit hard. So hearing that you have our backs is everything. So I think that's it. Thank you very much for that. I will say one of the other things I'm working on that I forgot to mention, so we're going to go back a little bit, is economic development. And I want to talk to you about this because it sounds a little bit like, wah, 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 that's not that exciting. This is why it's important to me. The people in our community are having a hard time making ends meet. Our housing costs, our cost of living is through the roof. And we are doing a lot of good things to help with our most vulnerable that I will always support. But we also have to work on opportunities for the middle class so that people can work a full-time job and it's enough to pay the bills. I am fascinated by this because when I look at the economy of our district in particular, or our county even, what we see is even during COVID, we see that people are working full-time jobs. So our unemployment rate doesn't look as hard hit as a lot of other areas in the state. But we also see that our TANF usage went sky high. So those two things tell me that we have people who are still working full-time jobs and cannot pay the bills. We have a working poor culture here. And that is a great concern to me because of our families and because just in general, I think that people deserve to be able to work 40 hours and it's enough and you should be able to meet your needs. But it all ties together when I think about, okay, who are our most vulnerable children and what has happened to them that I spoke about over the last year or so with COVID. You have to ask yourself how many of those kids, if we have this low unemployment rate, were home alone, right? And so we look, it all ties together. If we want to talk about how do we help people, we have to make sure they have opportunities to thrive. So I'm really interested in this. I have not spent my whole life looking at economic development because I'm a social worker. So normally that's not like within our area of expertise. But over the past few years working in the city of Blaine and being an advocate for people, I've become passionate about it because every one of those small businesses that I talk about are tied to a face and a family, and they have been hit so hard economically that if you go talk to them, they're often on the verge or in tears, sweating. I went and saw one of my favorite restaurant owners and picked up some takeout. I didn't tell him I noticed, but he literally has lost his hair since I saw him last, and he's just stressed. And I couldn't get the image out of my mind. You know, sometimes like when we see our presidents and we go, whoa, he really went gray in that first year. That's our restaurant owners right now. He told me we're losing $30,000 a month just to keep the lights on. So this is important for our families. When I support business, I'm not talking about Amazon. I'm not talking about, you know, they're doing fine. But in Whatcom County, it's small business, and these are our neighbors and our friends and the people we love. So if you can, when you hear me talking about that, understand that's why. That would be something you could do to support me. Thank you for asking.
Are there any other brief questions for Representative Rule? And you'll have to unmute yourself. We've got about 5 more minutes in her period, but I know you may be taking off for your kids too.
I have a quick question, I think, Michael.
Okay, Peach.
Yeah, I was wondering if there are any plans to convert Intelco plant into something else workable for the community and for Whatcom County.
Great question. Yes, there are plans. Is there something very solid and finalized? No, but what I am excited about is that the county and the small cities with our support and the Port of Bellingham are all looking at the possibilities there.
Michael,
I have
there's
a question. Oops.
I believe that Myra, who is muted, I think you were first out.
Okay. Hi, Alicia. Could you please remind us the bill number for your child homelessness definition standard?
Ooh, you're definitely testing my memory. 1221.
Thank you.
Okay. Robin, I think you were next.
I was just going to mention there's a question in the chat. Why did 1084 stall, and what do we need to do to get it passed next year? This is from Ellen Murphy.
So that is a perfect time for me to hand off to Rep. Rammel. Thank you all so much. And thank you again to Kaylee and Rep. Rammel for allowing me to go first. I really appreciate it.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
And I just want to mention before Rep. Rammel comes on, I forgot to mention this earlier. If you know anyone who missed this evening's meeting, we will try and post the video of it in a day or so on Facebook and on our website, which is all one word, indivisiblebellingham.org. Okay, Representative Rammel, thank you. About 15 minutes.
Great. Hey, thanks so much for putting this on. Michael, I know that you're the pitch hitter. Thanks for stepping up to that. That's sometimes an uncomfortable thing to do. Appreciate that. It's really good to see everybody. You know, I spend almost all day right now looking at Zoom meetings, and it's usually other faces. And so the best we can get in this COVID world right now is maybe just seeing new faces and old friends this way. And so appreciate everybody taking the time to connect, and curiosity and interest in what's going on in Olympia. I recognize many of you, but maybe not all. My name's Alex Rammel, representative from the 40th district, so sort of south. Hey, Deborah, sort of south end of Bellingham and Whatcom County, and then sort of the northwest corner in Skagit in the San Juan Islands. And I would just start off by saying that Alicia joining our team from the northwest corner this last year has been so great. I feel like we started to build a really solid team last year, and started to sort of really try and do a thoughtful, coordinated job of making sure everybody in the northwest corner had right doors to turn to, that we were being strategic and thoughtful about trying to make sure that priorities for our community always had somebody stepping up, and that we were being, planning ahead and doing the best we could. And adding Alicia to that team has been a real boon. I'm now in my second year at this job, and Sharon and Deborah and Senator Liz Lovelit are all in their third years. And so we're all starting to maybe get a better sense of what we're doing. And, I would just start off with one note along those lines is, we planned ahead at the beginning of this year for committee assignments to try and think through who's going to sit where and do what. And there's 4 committees that are called the money committees that represent sort of how money comes and goes in our state budget. And I'm on the transportation committee, I'm on the finance committee, Deborah's on the appropriation committee, and Alicia and Sharon are both on the capital budget committee, which means that our corner of the state has folks in the room for all of those decisions. And I think that's sort of an example of the way that we're trying to make sure that our community is well represented in all of the decisions that are happening in Olympia. So I'll talk briefly about kind of our 4 big priorities that the House Democratic Caucus set out at the beginning of the year. This is what we want you to measure our success against. These are the things we intend to make sure we're doing, and then I'll talk a little bit about some bills that I'm working on that fall into those buckets, but also some of the big things that we're working on and have recently passed. So the first priority we set was responding to the pandemic and the crisis that's happened there. Obviously, that means a robust public health response, but as Alicia was talking about, it's also making sure that the economic fallout for families and small businesses is addressed also. So one of the first things we did was passed what we call First Step. It's a $2.2 billion investment in public health, in communities, in housing, to preventing homelessness, in early learning and childcare. And that's out the door, signed by the governor, and that money will be hitting the streets soon. We've also started to, there's a lot more work to be done, but we've started to take a deep look and make some big steps to improve the challenges that we've seen with the unemployment through the employment services. One of the biggest challenges is that they were planning, because of the way the statute was written, to significantly increase the rates that they were going to be charging businesses. And as Alicia mentioned, our small businesses are hit especially hard by that. And those rate increases were huge. And they were terrifying to the companies, and they weren't intended and they weren't necessary. So we were able to fix that part. We're still working on some of the other pieces there, but that's one of the early sort of first step actions. And then the other thing that I think I want you to measure our success on is what we're doing about the potential for folks to fall into homelessness. There's about 250,000 people in Washington state right now who are behind on their rent or living in homes where the wage earner is behind on the rent. In many cases, months behind. And so we've got a moratorium on evictions right now, but we keep moving that date forward. But at some point, there's going to be a cliff, and we need to build a stair step for people down off of that cliff, or we're going to end up with 250,000 people who are facing eviction and homelessness. We can't let that happen. And so that has to be a huge priority. Senator Patty Kuderer has been leading the charge on that. We've put some money into housing and homelessness prevention in that first patch of money, but there's a lot more work to do there. So that's kind of the budget piece, the pandemic relief piece. When we look at our next priority, it's state budget. We have to pass a budget this year. And one of the things that has become increasingly stark in my understanding as I've become more familiar with how the state collects money and what we spend it on and where it comes from, is the enormous inequity in our tax code. The tax code is broken, it is unfair, it's not functional. Sales tax revenue dries up right when we most need our safety net at its strongest. It becomes weaker, and we're charging people in the bottom quartile of the income range 17% of their income in state and local taxes, and people in the top quartile are paying less than 5%. It's unfair and it's wrong, and we got to fix it. Good news, the Senate seems close, knock on wood. I don't want to jinx things, but it seems like they are close to moving on a capital gains tax proposal that would fund childcare, early childhood education. One of the smartest things we could spend money on anyway. That bill has moved out of Ways and Means Committee, which has always been kind of the barrier in the past. So we're hopeful that that'll be on its way over to the House soon. And then on the House side, we've proposed a number of ideas, but one of them that I think is particularly interesting is this idea of a wealth tax. And so the way the wealth tax works is it's charged to everyone, and everybody gets a blanket exemption for the first $1 billion in stuff that they own, meaning most of us have nothing to pay. And it's a 1% tax on everything above the first $1 billion. And that would raise about $5 billion per biennium in Washington state, $2.5 billion a year. And so putting those two things together seems like we're adding a lot of new taxes, but in another way, it's very much like, I think of this the way that we tax wealth on most people already. Most of us, many of us, have our wealth in our property. I own the condo I'm in right now, and that's my biggest asset by far. And I pay property tax on that every year. And if I go to sell it, I'll pay real estate excise tax. But the wealthiest in our society have their wealth in stocks and bonds and other assets, and they pay 0% every year on owning it. And when they go to sell it in Washington state, because there's no capital gains tax, they pay nothing on that. So we have the wealth that most people in Washington accumulate is being taxed already. And the wealth that the most well-off among us have pays nothing. So that's something I think we have a real shot at starting to fix this year. And so that's a big priority in my mind. I don't know how I'm doing on time here, Michael. I can keep talking as long as you want me to, but I do want to touch on 4 minutes left, 5 minutes left. Okay, I can do that. So the equity, confronting our racial injustice is a top priority for our caucus. Certainly that needs to look like the injustices that have been on display loudly and clearly and urgently in our criminal justice system. But also, I believe that it is increasingly clear to the majority of us that the injustices that have been so persistent in this country for generations need to be addressed at every level of every decision making that we're doing. It's part of our housing policy. It has to be part of our budget. It has to be part of our healthcare policy. It has to be part of our education policy, our environmental policy. And so what I want to tell you about is just how I think we're making important progress there. Right now, we would never pass a bill without asking, what does this cost? And we are starting to get to the point where we won't pass a bill without asking, what are the implications on racial justice? And that doesn't mean we get it right every time. We're not going to get it right every time, but we're starting to get to a place where those decisions are being made, at least with our eyes open. And I feel like that's important progress. And I'm excited to be part of that, beyond that journey with other folks, and hopeful that that will be an important part of how we can eventually tell our kids and our grandkids that we've overcome those injustices in the past. And along those lines, I will share just one bill that passed on Saturday. This is one of the proudest things I've done in the legislature is vote for the police tactics bill that we passed that responds to many of the injustices that have been on display in our police system. and bans chokeholds, bans neck holds. It bans militarized equipment for police departments, requires police officers who are wearing uniform to have their badge number on display. It severely constrains the use of tear gas to only the most exceptional and desperate situations. Many of those tactics that we've known have been problematic for a long time are addressed here. And what I will tell you is that that is a bold step, but it is also one that has been handled so well by the bill's prime sponsor, Jesse Johnson. And I had a conversation with the chief of police and the mayor of Mount Vernon a couple of weeks ago, who are concerned about the content of the bill. And when I followed up with them over the weekend to let them know where we had landed, they're satisfied. They're confident that they can move forward with community policing the way that they want to do it, while still limiting all of these tactics. What we've done is we've shored up our policing system in a way that upholds the profession and responds to the injustices and malpractice that's happened in the past. So I'm super proud to have been present to vote yes on that. And then the last thing I'll talk about as my time wraps up, our fourth caucus priority is confronting our climate crisis. Those of you that know me know that's been something I've been working hard on for many years, and is kind of one of the reasons I get up in the morning and I'm excited to do this work. On Saturday, we also passed the low carbon fuel standard, which will require our refiners to steadily and incrementally reduce the carbon content of the fuel that's being produced for transportation in Washington state. And what I will say about that bill is that it affirms that there is a place for our refinery workers in the clean energy future. We can do refining. We're going to be using liquid fuels into the future, and we can be using them from renewable sources. And so I've been a big proponent of passing that policy. I have two bills that I will briefly mention, one of which is unfortunately died last week and didn't make it out of committee. That's the one that was mentioned in the chat, House Bill 1084, which would steadily and incrementally decarbonize our building sector. About a quarter of our state's carbon pollution comes from burning gas in buildings, and we can steadily improve that by providing those same services with clean, efficient electric heat. And unfortunately, that bill didn't pass, but I remain committed to moving forward with the policies as best we can. I'm going to sit down and spend a lot more time working with the stakeholders. During the interim, we're going to get some agencies to help support developing those policy details, so that when we come back next year, we'll be ready to hit the ground running, and would love to have all of your help on that. And before Michael gets the hook, the last thing I will mention is my climate bill that's still alive, sets a standard for zero emission vehicle infrastructure. So we've got lots of things moving on, pun intended, on transportation electrification, right? GM 3 weeks ago announced that by 2035, they're not going to be making internal combustion engines anymore. The same is true for Volkswagen. Same is true for several other car companies. We're headed there, and whether you like it or not, we're going to be driving a lot more electric cars in Washington state. I like it. I think it's great. But it's coming for regardless of that. And so what we need is to make sure there's enough charging infrastructure in our buildings. I live in a condo. There's nowhere to plug an electric vehicle in the garage downstairs from me. So we need to start building buildings that are ready to put in charging infrastructure. And our electric utilities need to know what to plan for. They asked for this. They want to know how many electric cars are there going to be, roughly where are they going to be, how soon, what's that curve going to look like, so that we can be building not just the the load, the infrastructure of the wind generation and the storage, but also the wires and the lines and the substations to be able to support all of that new electricity. So that's my my bill. I'm anticipating hearing on it this week, and I just found out this morning that at least one Republican is going to vote with me. He's the chair of the Transportation Committee, so hopefully he'll bring a few more along with him. All right, Michael's going to get the hook. Thanks for letting me talk.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Just a quick check-in. We're going to go to Kaylee Galloway, but I want people to notice that we've got two questions, one from Deb Cruz on 1099 and one from Tim Douglas on the Plant a Million Trees initiative. But we'll do those, Kaylee, after we get your time. And I don't see anybody, I don't see Sarah here from Sharon's group. So I think that we'll probably be right on time. So Kaylee, you've got the next 15 minutes to enlighten us and enthrall us, okay? And then we'll take a couple minutes with the questions from Deb and Tim, and maybe there'll be more of it. Okay, Kaylee, you're on.
A couple of tough acts to follow, so be patient with me. Thank you all so much for having me tonight. Unfortunately, Rep. Lukianoff had a family matter come up this weekend and was unable to attend tonight. So like Michael here, I was asked last minute to speak on her behalf. So whatever I don't cover tonight, I'm happy to follow up with you all at a later date, or if there are additional questions I'm not able to answer, again, I'll do my best to follow up with you all. So really quick, wanted to just go over some of Rep. Lukianoff's bills. I think Rep. Rammel did such a great job giving that big picture view. So I was glad to have that taken care of on my list here. So kind of to dive a little bit deeper here. So Rep. Lukianoff had introduced 8 bills this session, all but one of them are still active. So I'll just kind of go in order here. So first bill that passed the House was Rep. Lukianoff's HB 1072, which has to do with expanding the Office of Civil Legal Aid to ensure that folks without documentation have access to legal representation. Actually, a lot of our laws already in place protect people without documentation. This was one of the remaining few that didn't. So we're really excited to work on this bill. We have another bill, HB 1356, which has to do with prohibiting the use of inappropriate Native-themed mascots, names, imageries, symbols. And this essentially says that school districts that have those inappropriate mascots or names need to transition away from them. And there are a couple exemptions built within this bill, including school districts that include a portion of or are county adjacent to a federally recognized tribe. So a really successful example that Rep. Lukianoff frames is actually the Spokane Indians. They had high school was the Indians was their mascot. The minor league baseball team was the Spokane Indians. And through a consultation process with the Spokane tribe, they actually came to an agreement. They retained their name, but for example, with the baseball uniforms, they actually use the Salish language. And so it really goes to show that there is a collaborative process to honor our Native Americans and our culture here in Washington State. Another really exciting bill that Rep. Lukianoff has been working collaboratively with folks on is replacing the Marcus Whitman statue in National Statuary Hall. So for those of you that have been Washington, D.C. and toured the U.S. Capitol, National Statuary Hall is home to 100 statues, so each state commissions 2. And the statues are supposed to be figures that the state recognizes of historical significance, or people who represent the values and culture of each state. So our current statues commissioned in, I believe it was 1951, is Marcus Whitman, and in the early 1970s was Mother Joseph. So this particular bill would be looking to bring the statue of Marcus Whitman home and to celebrate his history and to replace him with the statue of Billy Frank Jr. who of course has been such a historical figure from the last, 70, 80, 100 years in terms of recognizing the importance of salmon recovery and environmentalism and co-management with our sovereign tribal nations. So we're really excited to work with Billy Frank's Jr.'s son, Councilman Willie Frank out of the Nisqually, the Northwest Indian Fish Commission, the Defenders of Wildlife, and a host of others who've been great partners in this work. Just out of time, the last two big bills that I want to talk about tonight. So Rep. Lukianoff has been working on HB 1117. So this is one of a series of GMA related bills, the Growth Management Act. Rep. Lukianoff's bill specifically would incorporate salmon recovery into local comprehensive plans. So again, as our local jurisdictions think about the ways in which we're growing and we're developing within the urban growth area, ensuring that we consider salmon recovery. And this, complements Rep. Dewar's bill as well, 1099, which I know was referenced, having to do with incorporating climate change into the Growth Management Act. So both of these bills aim towards the same outcome, which is, growing smarter and more sustainably. The other component of 1117 is that it incorporates this concept of net ecological gain, which is a recommendation out of the ORCA task force. And this whole concept is ensuring that when we do develop, that we are incorporating mitigating measures to ensure that we're leaving it better off than how we found it. So I like to think of it as the principle, like when you go up into the mountains, you make sure you leave it better than when you found it. So we're really excited that bill just got pulled, so it's eligible for floor consideration now, and perhaps Rep. Rammel can speak more to the schedule of that. The last bill that I want to talk about, or I will say two more, the last bill is Washington Strong. So Rep. Lukianoff and Rep. Shoemake worked collaboratively with Senator Lovelit on this bill, Washington Strong. Our House version is 1513. But the Senate version is the vehicle, and that's 5373. And it's actually scheduled for a public hearing in the Senate Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee on Thursday, the 4th at 8 a.m. So for those of you interested in participating, there's still time to sign up for public testimony. And I'm happy to send you all the link once I wrap up here. So this bill is really exciting because it combines two of our four major caucus priorities, which is that of economic recovery and combating climate change. So the concept behind Washington Strong is it would initiate a $25 per ton carbon tax at an economy-wide scale with a 5% escalator over time. And this is looking to unlock upwards of $16 billion over 10 years through the issuance of a special tax obligation bond for revenues dedicated to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So this could look like green transportation and infrastructure. This could look like broadband. It could look like forest health and resiliency, climate resiliency measures. So we're really excited at the prospects of this bill. And I think that was all that I had to say on that. And then lastly, one of our bills that we introduced, it didn't move forward this session, but we really were just wanting to get Washington State on the national radar. And that was with House Joint Resolution 4205. So this would be the Washington State Green Amendment. And this bill has been in work in collaboration with the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, as well as with the Green Amendment for the Generations movement. And so again, Washington State is one of probably about a dozen different states who are exploring green amendments. And we follow two states, Pennsylvania and Montana, who have already passed similar amendments. And this idea would be that you amend the state constitution to ensure that people have the right, the inalienable right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. So as Rep. Lukianoff would say, this is the grandmother policy. This is the policy that informs all others. This is how we ensure that our future generations have a clean earth and an abundance of natural resources and a healthy place to call home. So those are some of the really exciting policies that Rep. Lukianoff and I and our caucus and our community and our folks are working on. And so I can pause there for questions. I know there was some questions around, what are legislators most concerned about, and kind of some questions around legislative engagement. So maybe I will pause. I will open for questions, and if Rep. Rammel has answers to questions as well. And then maybe just in the last 3 to 5 minutes, Michael, I can do a quick legislative engagement 101. How does that sound?
I was going to diplomatically say that before we let you off the hot seat, because there are a couple minutes left for both you and Alex to talk, that question, what would you like from us? And there is one question that we've not gotten to in the chat box, and that's the one from Tim Douglas. But so Kaylee, you're still on the hot seat about what would you most like from us? And then we're going to turn it over to both of you, because there isn't the rep from Rep Shoemake's office. So we'll end with general questions, but Kaylee, what would you most like around engagement, unless you were planning to speak to that?
Yeah, so I will say from my perspective as a staffer, I would love for each and every one of you to stay engaged with our office. We try to hold a weekly constituent coffee, and this is an opportunity for you all to engage with Rep. Lukianoff. So I would love if you all were interested in attending those. From Rep. Lukianoff's perspective, I mean, having insights into the boots on the ground, what you all care about, what your stances are on issues, that's really helpful. Having those constituent stories really help inform policy decisions. And frankly, there are stories that Rep. Lukianoff resonates with that end up in her floor speeches or her committee testimony or in her examples. Like I was given an example today about the Spokane Indian Baseball League, right? Like little stories like that have a huge impact. So I think from, Team Lukianoff, we say just keep up the good work and engage with us, share your thoughts with us, let us know what you're hearing on the ground as well. And then just to continue to engage with us via email, phone calls, text messages, or our constituent coffees and upcoming town hall in a few weeks here.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a few minutes, and we've got 2 unaddressed questions, a new one in, but let's start with Tim Douglas's question, which is a little bit up here in the chat box. Here it is. Alex, we're launching our Plant a Million Trees in Whatcom project. Can the state help us source seedlings to plant our first 1,000 trees? So Alex, could you talk about that for a couple minutes?
Yeah, I'm not certain if it's a perfect fit, but we actually, it's perfect timing, as one would expect from Tim Douglas. We just today passed a bill on urban forestry, House Bill 1216. I put a note about it in the chat there. And I'll just read you the summary of what that bill does. I think it could be a pretty good fit for, it changes, it directs the Department of Natural Resources to conduct analysis of the needs and opportunities related to urban forestry in Washington. And 2, it directs the Department of Natural Resources to provide technical assistance and capacity building resources and opportunities in order to promote urban and community forestry. So I think it could actually dovetail pretty closely with exactly what you're talking about, Tim. And if it is now passed to the House, so we just got to get it through the Senate then.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you.
How about, there's a new question in at the bottom from Emily Weiner, and it's thank you to Rep. Lukianoff for support in the capital budget for a construction of a House of Healing Coast Salish Longhouse at Western. Can you update on the status?
The only update I have, so this was one of the projects that was included. It's a project that Replicanoff has sponsored in the past, and it's a project that she continues to support. So that's the latest I have. Perhaps Rep. Bramwell has better insights into the capital budget in general. I think the little that I do know is that, as always, there are far more requests than there are funds. So it once again is going to be a highly competitive process. But again, we recognize the importance of this project here locally, and Replicanoff will continue to fight for it.
It was in the governor's budget, which is not a guarantee, but is a good first step. So it means the governor's asking for it. And I think this is exactly the reason, one of the reasons why it's beneficial for all of us to be working together, so that when the chair of the capital budget talks to each of us about what our priorities are, we can be bolstering each other's priorities. So I'll certainly be prepared to talk to him about the needs there. And I know Replicanoff is going to support the request I made for the Digwallich Treatment Recovery Center in Skagit County. So we just kind of all work together to back each other up on those things. So we will find out the Senate version of the capital budget in a couple of weeks, and then the House version comes out a week after that. And then they argue about the differences. But if it's in both, then we're in good shape.
We're down to about 4 minutes left. Does anybody have a last burning question, a zinger question, a supportive question? I'm looking at the other screen. There's thank yous coming in. So why don't we just say that, oh, Peach, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I do have a question. How important is it that we contact each of your offices and support a particular numbered bill? I mean, does that have much sway? What's the benefit of doing that? Annie?
Well, I think Kaylee and I probably offer slightly different perspectives on it, because those emails go directly to Kaylee and indirectly to me. So for the way that we look at that, I will sort of get a sense if we get a lot of comments on a particular bill, or if it's like if you write your own email about something and it's in detail, and this is the experience I've had with this body of policy, and this is why something is a challenge, then I would look at that. If it's sort of a automated click and send it, I get sort of updated when we get a lot of them. But if it's just a few, not as much. I think it's useful because when we do get a lot of them, it's then a talking point that we can use, right? For example, we're getting a lot of email right now about the Worker Protection Act. And that's one that's going to be a little bit of a push, and we're going to have to make a decision to spend a lot of floor time if we want to take action on that. And so for me to say, hey, this is something I want to do, it's helpful to say, hey, we've gotten 100 or more emails in about this. That starts to be effective. If the other thing is if you have like a personalized story, as Kaylee was saying, and if it's an email that's from you, from your experience, that can be really valuable too. I don't know, Kaylee, do you want to add anything there?
I'm just going to reflect that Rep. Bramwell's LA Amanda is amazing, and she actually tallies every single email in an Excel spreadsheet, which is just above and beyond any other LA. But yeah, I would say, and another great example was when the House was considering the unemployment insurance rates bill. We were asked to compile constituent stories. So coming together and finding our local small businesses who had examples of, oh man, I used to pay this much and now it's increased 700%. And I don't know how to afford this. I'm just trying to reopen again. You know, I'm trying to do it safely, but I can't afford it. Revenue was down. So examples like that are really compelling. So yeah, I just echo everything Rep. Bramall said. I would like to do a little like engagement 101 if that's okay. I don't know if folks already know all the stuff that I want to share, but if you have a couple minutes, 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Was there anything else anybody else wanted to go over, or if Rep. Bramall had any other thoughts?
No, go to it.
Go for it.
Okay. I am going to share my screen if it'll allow me. Okay, do you all see my screen here? It's the legislative website. Yes?
Yep.
Okay, so the first bit I wanted, as many of you know, how to track bills. So if you just visit ledge.wa.gov, go to bill, you can search by bill number, or you can also search by sponsor. So say, oh goodness, I don't remember what bill number that was, but I know Rep. Bramall introduced it. So you can search and you can see all of the bills that Rep. Bramall has introduced. So that's a really great function. The other bit I wanted to go over is how to testify on a bill. So as we start to enter back into committees starting March 10th, for the next about 2.5, 3 weeks, there'll be opportunity to testify in the House and Senate. So you can go here, participating in the process. You can say testify in a virtual hearing. So for example, you could click here. You could click on which chamber. So for example, if you wanted to testify on Washington Strong, you could do here. You could submit your written testimony. You could say, I want to testify live during hearing, or I just want to make my stance known. So that's a really great way to go about that. For those interested in tracking the House floor, you can go right here on to the House calendar. This will actually, you can see the House is currently adjourned, but when it's active, you can actually see which bills they're considering, and you can track the bill numbers and you can track their votes. So if you go to today's, for example, you can see all the votes they took today, including the one mentioned on urban community forest here. The last bit is for folks interested in just watching, which can be really exciting. As you know, that you can be done on TVW here. If you just go up to the corner under schedule, you can see all, I mean, currently nothing is active, but you can see which one's here, and you can search by date, and you can watch the video or just listen to everything that's going on. And this will be for the floor or different committee hearings. So I hope that wasn't too rudimentary for all of you experts, but sometimes folks don't know the little ins and outs and the tips and tricks. And so as somebody who's learning still myself, I always just want to share the little bit that I do know. And I'm happy to answer any questions off the record or now or whenever, if you folks have any process-oriented questions. So thank you.
I think at this point, we're now at the Betty Bye time for some of us. And we should just remember that we have a quartet of amazing legislators and their teams. We're so fortunate here. So we got to keep supporting these folks and everybody out there. Just thank you for joining us. Be safe, be well, and until the next time. Philip, you're on for ending the meeting.